How Mussolini took control of Italian women's lives. Mussolini did not need secret police in every home to control Italian women. He used laws, schools, churches, and family life instead. He decided who women should become, how they should live, and what their bodies were for. Under fascism, women were not treated as citizens with personal futures. They were treated as state assets, measured by what they could produce and how quietly they complied. Marriage, motherhood, work, and even appearance were no longer private matters. They became political obligations. This story is not about one policy or one law. It is about how a modern European state quietly reorganized half its population without mass imprisonment or constant violence. The question is simple and unsettling. How did control over women become a foundation of fascist power? And why did so many institutions help enforce it? From the beginning of his rule, Mussolini viewed women through a demographic lens. In his vision, Italy's strength depended on numbers. More workers, more soldiers, more citizens shaped by fascist loyalty. Women were central to that calculation, not as individuals with personal futures, but as instruments of national expansion. In 1927, the regime launched what it called the Battle for Births. The goal was to dramatically increase Italy's population within a single generation. This was not framed as encouragement or social support. It was presented as a patriotic obligation. Motherhood became a civic duty. Women who produced large families were publicly praised, financially rewarded, and symbolically elevated. The state offered tax benefits, food discounts, and employment advantages to households with many children. Public ceremonies celebrated prolific mothers, awarding medals that marked fertility as a form of national service. At the same time, women who did not conform were treated as a problem to be corrected. Remaining unmarried or childless was portrayed as selfish and harmful to society. Special taxes penalized those who delayed marriage. Media outlets ran constant stories suggesting that women without children lived empty, unhappy lives. Doctors were encouraged to tell women that frequent pregnancy was healthy and natural, regardless of the medical risks. The regime did not simply promote childbirth. It removed choice. Contraception was outlawed. Anyone selling or using birth control faced punishment. Abortion was banned completely, with doctors threatened with arrest and prison for performing it. Women seeking to avoid pregnancy were forced into secrecy, relying on unsafe methods that often led to infection, injury, or death. Healthcare did not improve to support the surge in births. Hospitals were underfunded and overcrowded. Maternal mortality remained high. Complications were common, but the state focused on keeping birth numbers rising rather than protecting women's long-term health. Reproduction became a measurable output. Risk became acceptable. Economic independence posed another obstacle to Mussolini's social model. A woman with her own income could delay marriage, limit children, or leave a harmful household. That autonomy had to be reduced. In 1933, laws restricted women's access to government employment. Only a small fraction of public jobs could be held by women. This directly targeted educated professionals, teachers, clerks, civil servants, many of whom had trained specifically for these roles. Later, similar policies spread into private businesses. Employers were encouraged to replace female workers with men. Companies that complied often received state benefits. Women were pushed out not for lack of skill, but for violating fascist ideals. The justification was framed as economic necessity. Men, Mussolini argued, were breadwinners. Women belonged in the home. The result was deliberate dependency. Middle-class women lost careers overnight. Working-class women were not removed entirely from labor, but confined to low-paid, unstable, and dangerous work in factories and agriculture. Wages were lower. Job security was almost non-existent. Advancement was rare. Women were allowed to work only where their labor was needed and their independence limited. Education reinforced this structure from childhood. Girls were taught differently from boys by design, not by accident. Academic subjects were reduced or reframed. Domestic skills became central to schooling. Lessons focused on childcare, cooking, sewing, and obedience. Textbooks glorified large families and traditional roles. Literature emphasized sacrifice and motherhood as fulfillment. Even biology lessons revolved around reproduction rather than scientific understanding. Outside the classroom, propaganda completed the message. Newspapers and magazines promoted the image of the cheerful housewife devoted to family life. Women who pursued careers were portrayed as unhappy or morally misguided. Independence was linked with loneliness and social decay. Public life reflected the same exclusion. Women were barred from political participation entirely. They could not vote. They could not hold office. Fascist women's organizations existed, but they operated under strict government control, reinforcing official ideology rather than representing women's interests. Family law became another mechanism of control. In 1930, divorce was abolished completely. Marriage became legally permanent, regardless of abuse, abandonment, or hardship. Separation offered no real protection. Women had limited legal claims to financial support. For those trapped in destructive marriages, escape was almost impossible. If a husband left, the wife often had no reliable income. With restricted access to employment, many women fell into poverty. The state offered little assistance. This policy aligned closely with Catholic doctrine, and the regime strengthened its alliance with the Church, giving religious institutions greater authority over marriage and education. Priests reinforced state messaging about obedience, large families, and traditional gender roles from the pulpit. Control was not evenly applied. Men faced few consequences for infidelity or abandonment. Wealthy men frequently lived outside the moral standards imposed on women. Public officials, including Mussolini himself, were known for extramarital relationships that carried no punishment. Widows suffered similarly. Property rights were limited. Employment options were scarce. Survival often depended on charity or extended family support. Even appearance became political. The regime discouraged modern fashion, makeup, and expressive styles. Simplicity and modesty were promoted as patriotic. Women's bodies were expected not only to produce children, but to visually reflect ideological discipline. Yet despite the reach of the system, obedience was never total. Resistance often began quietly. Women shared information about avoiding pregnancy. Midwives and sympathetic doctors distributed contraceptives in secret. Herbal remedies and informal knowledge networks spread where official medicine was forbidden. These acts were small, but constant. As repression intensified, resistance expanded beyond private defiance. Women became vital to underground movements, carrying messages, hiding activists, distributing illegal publications, and maintaining communication between resistance cells. During the war years, their involvement deepened further. Women joined partisan groups, smuggled weapons and supplies, gathered intelligence, and participated directly in armed operations. Others focused on rescue efforts, hiding Jewish families and political targets from arrest and deportation. Homes, convents, and rural safe houses became lifelines. Forged documents and escape routes were organized largely through female networks. The risks were severe. Arrest often meant torture, imprisonment, or execution. Many women were killed. Others survived concentration camps and later documented what they endured. Their participation was not symbolic, it was structural. Without women, much of the resistance infrastructure could not function. When Mussolini was removed from power and the fascist system collapsed, reforms followed. Women gained voting rights. Employment barriers were lifted over time. Divorce was eventually restored. But the damage remained. Years of forced dependency had erased education, careers, and opportunity. Social expectations shaped under fascism endured long after its fall. Many women had lost entire life paths that could never be recovered. It took decades of activism, legal reform, and cultural change to undo what had been normalized. Mussolini's control over women was not an isolated set of policies. It was a comprehensive system that reshaped bodies, families, labor, and identity to serve authoritarian power. The regime did not rely solely on violence to enforce it. It relied on law, religion, education, and social pressure, turning everyday life into a mechanism of control. And for years, it worked. Mussolini's control over Italian women was not a side effect of fascism. It was one of its foundations. By regulating reproduction, labor, education, and family life, the regime turned private existence into political territory. Women were not ruled through constant force, but through systems that made obedience appear normal and alternatives impossible. The tragedy is not only what was taken, but how quietly it was done, with laws, ceremonies, and institutions that claimed to protect society. When fascism collapsed, women regained rights. But time, opportunity, and autonomy could not be restored so easily. What remained was proof that authoritarian power does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it enters through everyday life and stays there far longer than the regime that created it.